Hello, everybody. Today we're looking at Allied gameplay strategies for the simplified 2012 version of Axis and Allies, known as 1941 edition. When this version of ANA came out, it represented a surprising departure from the developmental arc of the game, especially for me and a lot of other fans, I think, who came to just expect more operationally focused setups from game designers moving forward. That had been the trend anyway. It was like ANA postmodernism, rejection of the grand narrative in favor of theater specific stories to play out. I was all for more complexity, more rules, more nuance, um, because, well, I'm a super fan of Ameritrash dudes on a map, buckets of D6 area control games. But when 1941 dropped, billed as ANA Light, the trimmed down grand strategy beginner setup, made to be accessible and especially attractive to curious newcomers to the hobby, I remember I was not as excited about playing this game as I'd been about, say, ANA Europe and Pacific when they came out. But the more I thought about it, the more I appreciated how cool this concept was. I never in a million years would have thought that less could work well when it came to this game setup or game system. But it does. Honestly, 1941 really works, I must say, very well. I felt like the game had been extensively play tested and balanced and refined. So today I'd like to use the AAA software to demonstrate some gameplay tips and strategies you may use with your physical game board the next time you play against your friends. The Allied side in this version is harder to play, in my opinion. So let's battle an AI on the hardest difficulty setting as the big three, so we can really highlight some of the unique characteristics of ANA Light. So, very quickly, for the uninitiated, here are some important details which set ANA 1941 apart from other versions of the game. There are fewer territories, there's way less IPCs, money available. Many notable territories have no value at all. Giant army stacks aren't going to appear in this version. There's no technological advancement feature, there's no strategic bombing, no shore bombards during amphibious invasions, there's no new factory building, there are no AA guns, cruisers, or artillery, or anything like that. The cost of carriers and battleships are reduced. Otherwise, they'd be completely unaffordable. For example, the USA only has an economy of 17. The weakest starting economy in the game is Japan with 9 IPCs. Finally, transports are 0-0 attack, defense. They can't even soak hits in naval combat. They're completely vulnerable in this game. This change is actually a nightmare to manage, especially for the Allies. And lastly, subs, I don't think can even be seen by planes at all. They can't be attacked by them, I know that. So where does this leave us? Well, on first glance, on the surface, in a pickle as the Allied player. The Axis initial setup appears to be no joke. They have 61 units ready to go on their first turn. The Allies have, I think, about 72 total, but I count about 12 of them that aren't going anywhere before the Allies establish total naval superiority over the Germans and the Japanese. What does this all mean? It means it's really hard to get the ball rolling as the Allies before Russia falls, because it will fall in this game without serious intervention from the British and the Americans. When I play the Allies in this version, my main rule is no transports to be built in the Atlantic Ocean before I have no less than a 2-to-1 naval superiority over Germany. I move whatever transports I have to start with out of harm's way. I let the Americans build a strong navy in the Atlantic. They are the only power in the game that should be building battleships and aircraft carriers at the outset. Great Britain is also poor in this game. They can't protect a transport fleet by themselves against German planes and aircraft, so I don't try to do it. Like I said, this task is left to the Americans. German planes sinking transports for free is what Axis victory looks like in 1941 to me. Instead, I build a fighter in India every turn with the British. India in this game is the Alamo, it's the Karelia of the original, and the Caucasus of the revised edition. Great Britain can't lose India. I even evacuate everything around it on my first turn to try and stack it up with as many units as possible before the Japanese have time to react. If India falls, Japan can transfer their aircraft across the board in 2 turns. They could be sinking ships in the Atlantic very quickly. India must play a key role in the Allied grand strategy. If played successfully, the India barrier completely unhinges the Japanese from the greater Axis war effort, and this leads me to the novel and interesting solution to the age-old problem faced by the Allied players of ANA. To deal with Germany first, after all, we can all agree that Germany represents the far greater threat to the Allies. Absolutely. However, Japan's formidable initial deployment of units barely hides an ugly truth, and that is they are critically weak and economically um, vulnerable and have no easy way to improve their strategic position in Asia. Everything they have to gain will be hard fought, and they absolutely can't afford to replace big losses. And by that I mean ships of any kind and aircraft, nor can they build new units in Asia, which means America can blockade the home island to much deadlier effect in this game, and in the process completely unplug and starve the Japanese army on the continent. These conditions must be taken advantage of by the Allies, otherwise, the game will likely end in an absolutely blowout victory by the Axis. So, unplug Japan quickly to leave Germany hanging. Also, deploy U.S. warships liberally in the Atlantic to begin. So, what I hope to showcase here is American industrial might in its full glory. Carriers, planes, battleships, freely deploy them aggressively in both oceans in spots where they will draw large scale responses. Massive exchanges are even desirable where great victories aren't possible. So, if you can just you know, exchange with what you bring with what the Japanese or Germans bring in, it's to the Allied advantage. American ships come back, planes come back, they come back. Japanese ships and German ships do not. The Americans in real life actually scraped some of their ships off the bottom of Pearl Harbor and had them back in action by 1945. And you get the same feeling here. If Japanese or Germans spend money on ships, they go backwards in the USSR, period. And it only takes 2 or 3 cataclysmic battles or showdowns to break the Axis, even if they are washes or end inconclusively. One in India, 1 or 2 naval battles in the Pacific, or maybe a Sixth Army style annihilation of the German forces in the west of Moscow. And the war's decided. The Axis just can't take the bumps orchestrated by the US. They can't take repeated knocks. They collapse very quickly if they do. The timing of these big battles is important. So, whenever or wherever there are a lot of expensive Axis units in a single territory with few infantry, I attack. I inflict permanent losses that way. So, let's see what we have here. Just fix my computer a little bit. It started snowing a lot more than I thought it would. I'm not as cold as I might look either. It's not even that much below zero. I'm like maybe 1 to -1 or something. So, yeah, with the Americans, you get your Atlantic fleet going. You're building the big heavy ships. Um, Germany can't do the same. It does take 2 turns to get to Western Europe from Eastern United States, just like in Revised. Interestingly enough, though, Africa, there's almost nothing of value in the entire continent. Maybe Egypt's 1 and South Africa's worth 2. So if you're headed there on 1 turn, the next step should be Southern Europe if you're the Americans. So just finishing off the Japanese Pacific Fleet, are trying to. They make I mean, it's so hard for the Axis player, I find, um, to really manage their resources here because their economy is so weak. And it's like the Japanese just sacrificed their battleship, like the Yamato or something like that, for a delaying action. Except they did it at the beginning of the war. And try and get the American bomber in action too. It's really fun to catch transports hanging in this. They just disappear, right? And turnabout is fair play. You do that to the Axis player as well. However, they can inflict way more damage to the Allies by doing the same thing. Russia's sort of restricted to the 3 infantry, 3-2 infantry per turn until they get some sort of major reversal on the Eastern Front. But they simply can't afford anything other than infantry for the first half of the game. It's really hard to hold the Caucasus. Take it back if you can. Yet Japan just, without the ability to build in Asia, they are so weak in this game, I find. The initial see, and here is a perfect example of what I'm talking about when there's a little bit of desperation you can see in the Axis player, and they collect a bunch of expensive units in a zone like they just did in Caucasus. Attack. Just attack. Those planes are gone now for the entire remainder of the game. With an economy so weak as the Japanese, you won't see their fighters anymore. So that takes care of one problem. That was kind of an all or nothing move by the computer to grab the Caucasus. And they did keep it, but the cost is too high. The cost is way too high. That's the balance of the Japanese Air Force gone. Maybe put my hood up a bit here. So I still have India, and that threatens the Caucasus. Even though the Germans are very close to the gates of Moscow, they still have that thorn in the side there to the South India, which can threaten, their production on the Eastern Front. A whole 2 units. So look at the Japanese already. China, half of China isn't worth anything. The Soviet Far East isn't worth anything. Everything they want to do and need to do is just so difficult for them and costs so much. So you can really exploit that as the Allied player, which is a significant departure from other versions of A&A, really. It really is advisable to perhaps concentrate on the Japanese. They're like the Colossus with clay feet, at least to begin the war with their big navy. You can just push them over and the whole thing just smashes, shatters, and they can't put the pieces back together. I mean, what do you expect with an economy of, oh, I don't know, 5 or 6? It's like you can't build even one plane. And then they're in the terrible position of trying to protect their transports without a navy, which is impossible. That kills the imperial army on the continent. But I mean, it looks dangerous. The situation on the Eastern Front. The Germans are like I said, they're always threatening, but very much less so when Russia just does not have to worry about deploying a lot of units in the Far East because Japan is so weakened by having to face like a powerful British presence in India, and anything that the Americans want to do in the Pacific Ocean. You drive south towards the Indian Ocean and create a expensive battle the Japanese can't really afford to fight. Or I didn't do it in this game, but a really effective fun strategy is just park the U.S. fleet in the Sea of Japan, create like a massive battle that the Japanese have to fight, and even if you lose, what are the Japanese losing? The ability to sustain their army on the continent, and most of their power pieces that they can't afford to replace. Yeah, so you gotta. Yeah, here comes the Western Front, Western Europe. But like I said, that this move comes only after you chase the German Navy. You just cannot have, subs, a battleship threatening, or even an air force in the western part of Europe, because they will find a hanging transport and it'll simply be removed off the map without a fight. So, and like I said, that is what an Allied defeat looks like in this version of ANA. It's really hard to get used to, especially for OG Axis and Allies players like me. I have to admit there are a few restarts for sure. I couldn't understand what was going wrong, and then you really have to sort of be extra careful with how you set up your D-Day timetable. And so you also get as many airplanes, American airplanes, British airplanes, into India that can also sort of fly around and help in Moscow when the attack comes. And Germany is preparing for a big push here. But once again, I have enough units to make it extremely expensive. And they have a second front now to worry about. So what's Russia going to do? Well, fortify the Russia province, prepare for the inevitable assault on Moscow. But I mean, even if it does fall, you have the ability, by keeping India, to strike back directly into the Caucasus, and that will create an exchange sort of situation where the Germans will be left with Russia, that's worth 3 points, and Caucasus and India, also 3 points. So, yeah, the Russians aren't going to be building, but certainly the Allies are still in it as long as India survives. They have a big army in Eastern Europe. It's 2 turns away from the finish line. What will they do with it? At least some of their forces will have to be diverted west. Yeah, here comes the assault. Big army in Western Russia now. Now have the British component to the Western Front. That just adds up. Yeah, it's going to take a lot of units, German units, to push me out of the West. Yeah, here comes the, I'm attacking the Caucasus. Japan just not a factor anymore already. Probably lose everything here on the continent. And that's so critical. Like, if there's nothing to distract the Russians on their eastern front, then they can just concentrate on Germany. I mean, it goes without saying, but not the only one crazy enough to be out here. That's not that bad. My bum's a bit cold, that's about it. So yeah, China's a write-off. And their Japanese are just barely holding on in one of their territories there, and that's a wrap for the Japanese. So the Germans, yeah, coastal China, Shanghai they have, and that's going to be the extent of their holdings. But you'll see the Germans are going to have like a decision to make here. Their ally is, out of the game basically, for all intents and purposes. They're going to have a sort of low percentage all or nothing attack into Moscow in the next turn. With miracle die rolls, like if they get mostly hits, they can do it. But I have a lot of aircraft there. It's unlikely. Like, that battle will likely result in whatever the Germans have being reduced by at least 50%. And that's if they're lucky. It could go horribly if they roll a bunch of terrible results with attacking with just infantry. You get no hits. I've seen that before with 11 dice, looking for ones. That would be the game right there. That's the balance of the German army. But we'll see if the AI can gamble. I think if I was the Germans or in this situation, I would go for it because I know what's coming. All right, I would at least try one attack. I would bail after the first round if it went bad, but you might see that huge army turn west to deal with the Western Front. That's the type of stuff you expect from an AI. It doesn't usually like to gamble, and that's its. Some might say it's Achilles' heel against a human player. It just doesn't have the right stuff to take dangerous gambles when they're warranted. I'd say it's 50-50 whether they launch that attack or not. We'll see. So America's going to take another piece of the pie, Southern Europe. That's not good for Germany. They're going to have to respond, I think. They could wind up losing Germany if they don't. So they can't they can't very well exchange Russia for Germany. That's game over if that happens. Yeah, so and then I'll have another build with the Russians there. I'll have like 6 men and 4 planes. And the ability to counterattack from the south. And from the west. So we'll see. We'll see what the it's going to be a difficult choice for the German AI. Russia's turn is going to be super fast, though. I'll just buy men. Put them in the capital. $25 for the Americans. Japan's like 1/5 or something their economy, so it's I don't know, historical. I like it. More in line with history. That's I mean this game really plays out that way. Yeah, I'll just fortify the Russia province. It's a shame I can't, finish the Japanese off in coastal China, but their priority is Russia right now. 7 IPCs. It's not good because that means I only get 2 men. So yeah, the Germans turned west. Yeah, they're torn. That's that's the best I could hope for. That the final assault into Russia wasn't a lock. It was it was something that I would have like a human would try, gamble. one round, maybe get a miracle mitt full of ones, and that would be the game. But the one thing that the AI realized it could do was push me backwards on the Western Front, so it had to do it. There's a coffee run behind me. So, attacking back into Western Russia, German Sixth Army is, I guess, retreated. So that's a bit different, and it has air support. It's west of Stalingrad now. But it's cool too, because if that concentration of troops gets eliminated, then yeah, it feels historical. That'd be just like, the end of 1942, when it was the obvious turning point. But Germany still has teeth here. They're probably trying to regroup, but without a dangerous ally, I mean, good luck. They're fighting a war on two fronts. The Japanese are no help whatsoever. They're locked in on their own island. And, with an economy of what, four? They can't do anything anymore. So is it a matter of time? We'll see. Like, as soon as I'm able to eliminate the German army in the east, we'll fast forward it, because I mean that would represent Germany's last stand on that front. You can't be sloppy though. Like, I mean, even though Japan is like completely isolated, they can still sort of sting you with airplanes. They can catch transports unprotected. It's still, they can be sort of a real annoyance, but it's not a major factor. They're certainly not going to be able to turn the tide, but they can, make it excruciatingly painful by prolonging this. So, yeah, I like how they have a bomber in southern Europe now. But Germany's getting carved. More American forces in the Atlantic. What's left of the German Air Force has moved west. It's interesting too, they did nothing with their Mediterranean. I guess that would represent like Italian ships. They, once they were overmatched numerically, they just sort of parked them down there and did nothing. I mean, at some point, maybe you would find an opportunity to sacrifice them for some greater good, but I don't know. Nothing's good at this point for Germany. Yeah, there's still they still have a lot of men though. 13 men, Eastern Front. You might see them consolidate that into like one consolidated into Eastern Europe would make sense to me. So, like I've said in previous versions of ANA, once the Germans adopt like this all-out defense, it's no solution. It really isn't. The end is nigh when you see that strategy unfolding. And then, of course, you see the next thing you see is the Russians switch from building infantry to tanks. And that's not good. Yeah. Japan now is completely isolated. They're a non factor. They have been for several turns now. It's really cool how that plays out, or how it can play out if the Allies approach um, a grand strategy that really focuses on eliminating the Japanese as a significant factor in all of this. So just a whole conglomeration of Allied units in Russia now. That's what you want to see, a true alliance. Let's see if the Germans, well, they may have units stranded in Archangel. I don't know what the Germans are going to do here. We'll see. Oh, that's interesting. So they're going to sacrifice their entire air force to delay the British, and that's permanent as well. That's a one-off. What did the Germans call that in real life? Base plate or something? Their operation to slow the Allies. Anyway, they used up everything they had. I don't think it worked. They lost everything. They weren't even around much after that. I don't think. Very few pilots left, and that's what we see here. But at least in this case, they did a lot of damage. They sunk a lot of British ships, but they're gone forever. That was the price. Germans can't hope to build anything like that anymore. So the British can march out of Norway and Finland and take back Karelia. At this point, you can just pretty much do whatever you want with the Allies and be reckless. Just have as long as the casualties are mounting on the German side, you can safely outproduce them. So yeah, see, they did actually. The Germans consolidated in Western Russia. So that'll be like their Sixth Army equivalent. Once that's gone, the roads are open to Berlin because you'll just be able to plow right through Eastern Europe. So when that happens, I'm probably just going to fast forward the game so you can get a sense of how it actually ends, or how long it takes to end from this point. We'll see. I hope it doesn't take too long. I don't know who's going to be. I guess, going to come down to the Russians, so that's appropriate. on America. Yeah, see you can still get stung by the Japanese Air Force here and there. They'll find your transports, and it's a bummer. A Japanese bomber in Western Europe, that's the best place for it. You'd see that on like turn 3 if they took India, and that would be just a serious problem for the Allies. That's why you have to protect India. Just a whole ton of American stuff, hardware on the way. Oops. Bit of snow coming off the roof. So is it time? Yes. Here we go. This is the end of the Sixth Army potentially. This is the end of the. This is it. Honestly, it's Germany's last hope, and it's gone. So now that we've seen the last stand by Germany in Western Russia, we may, imagine it's already 1944 in our game. And I'll fast forward in a minute to the end of the story because it's going to be a predictable outcome. One thing I have to add, though, is many people online criticize the victory conditions of this game as stated in the rules. And this is fair. For all intents and purposes, the game is over when Germany and Japan only hold their capital territories, and there's no real need to play it out. It's a non-recoverable strategic position. So just say that Axis are forced to surrender at that point and end the game mercifully. So I fast forwarded it basically 17 minutes so you can see the actual final battle here. And here it is. So there you go, guys. ANA 1941 edition. Who knew it could mirror history like it does and be really fun too at the same time? Like there was a close call there. And still, that's with half the regular features deleted. Try some of these techniques on your physical game board. You could accessorize it with painted minis or something, or use leftover bits from other versions of ANA. Just don't let some of the cheapness and cost-saving measures people like to cite online to prevent you from trying out or revisiting this well-designed adaptation of ANA. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more content coming soon.